it to be?
It's like got to do with yours. Go ahead and put this on stop, Chris.
May I have your names and the spelling of your names?
Jerry Smith, and that's with a J, Y at the end.
Wardell Smith. And my first name is spelled Wardell.
And where do you live?
I presently live in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
We have a street address too.
3843 North of 16th Street.
And zip code there.
19140.
Do you have a phone there too, Wardell?
Yes. My home number. Area code 215-228-5572.
Jerry?
I live at 1050 Hobbit Street, spelled Hobbit. That's in Fort Collins, Colorado. And the zip code is 80526.
Phone number?
Area code 970-407-0345.
How long have you guys lived in Casper, or have you lived in Casper?
Let's see. Well, I lived in Casper. Let's see. We moved here when I was age 2, and I lived here till age 18.
What's your date of birth?
5755.
We moved here and we came here to Christmas of 1957.
Yep. How long did you live here?
How long have I lived? Well, I was here until, from that point, until I was 21 years old. That's when I left.
What year was it?
The year was 1970.
What's your birthday, Wardell?
November 23rd, 1948.
By the way, both of you, I meant to mention at the beginning too, if we ask you any questions that you really don't want to answer, just tell us that. Okay, we certainly understand. Just pass on that one. Okay. Could you tell us your parents' names, please?
Frank and Maddie Mae Smith. Maddie spelled with 2 T's, I-E.
M-A-E?
May is
Yep.
M-A-E.
Yeah.
Could you tell us when they came here and what they did, etc.? Can you give us the background of their arrival here?
As he said, came here Christmas of 1957.
My daddy came before.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'll let you do that since you're...
From where?
From Mississippi.
Do you remember where in Mississippi?
Wesson, Mississippi.
W-E-S-S-E-N?
W-E-S-S-O-N.
Okay. Go ahead.
And my dad preceded us by about 2 years. I think he came here. In fact, you were born in 1955. My dad left just before he was born.
Mm-hmm. What brought him here?
There were very limited opportunities in Mississippi other than working as field hands, or sharecroppers, things of that nature. He wasn't satisfied with, the quality of life there in Mississippi. He wanted to offer more to his family, and he wanted better opportunities, so he left here. He left there. We had an uncle that already lived out here, and he told him, there was better opportunities out here. You get better jobs, make more money, and things of that nature.
Who was your uncle?
Uncle Charlie. His name is Charles Wilson.
Yeah, I think
Augustus' first cousin, right?
What?
He's your first cousin, isn't he?
Who?
Uncle Charlie.
It's your brother-in-law.
I'm sorry, your brother-in-law.
um,
Thank you.
I think also if you look at what was going on in the South in the late 50s, and you're looking at an important aspect of the civil rights legacy and the things that were going on in Mississippi. You know, there were, you know, the Jim Crow segregation, and I think my father just saw that that wasn't a place that he wanted to raise a family in, is what Wardale said. And I think also the educational opportunities, the, you know, the segregation there, the disparate school system that blacks and white had. My father always valued education. I think that was another reason that prompted him to move out in kind of a barren land as far as for black people, but given the choice between here and Mississippi, I think he chose, you know, Wyoming over Mississippi.
Okay, great.
He's right. Education down there was, like he said, it was segregated, and it certainly wasn't equal. I remember going to grade school down there. Grades 1 through 6 was held in a tiny little house out in the country somewhere, and you had 2 teachers for all 6 grades. And
Segregated?
segregated, yes. You were not allowed to go to white schools. Period. Separate, a completely separate system.
Supposedly separate but equal, which that was a joke. And I think, you know, coming up here, the educational differences were showed immediately because my brothers, I wasn't old enough to go to school yet, but they were all held back grades because, you know, what the teachers were looking at they thought was ignorance or lack of intellect, was, but actually it was just exposure. They had not been exposed to the same type of, you know, curriculum that their, you know, classmates, counterparts, white counterparts had been exposed to. And so they were all held back grades and all, but I think given the opportunity, the educational opportunity, they all caught up and, you know, equated, if not excelled, their classmates in a really quick time period, too.
I want to return to that education first, but you talked about brothers and sisters. Could you please tell me the order where we are? Do you have older brothers or sisters, Wardale?
I'm the second oldest. My brother Vernon is the oldest. There are 6 brothers and 2 sisters.
Okay, could you give me the order? Vernon first, and then, where's Vernon now?
Vernon is in Philadelphia.
He's in Bakersfield, and Wardale is next from Philadelphia. He lives in Philadelphia. And Albert is the third eldest. He's in Georgia. And then comes Clarence. He's in San Diego, California. And then myself, I'm the 5th oldest. There were 5 boys in a row. And Rosetta, my sister, broke the streak. She came in. Then after Rosetta, that's spelled Rosetta, comes Ricky, my brother here. Rosetta, I'm sorry, lives in Durham, North Carolina now. So you can see we're kind of spread out in a lot of different ways. And then after Ricky, who lives in Wyoming also, he lives in Casper. And then the youngest is Valerie, and she lives in Casper as well. But she just recently moved here from Kentucky.
All right, let's go back then to your father coming here to Casper in 1955. Was that what you said? Okay, he left before you were born, or you were, how old were you when he left?
Well, he was just a baby. He wasn't even born yet.
Okay.
He wasn't born until afterwards. Okay.
And you were how old then?
Oh, let's see. I was about 7 years old then.
Okay. Wardale, you had gone to the schools down there then, that
Up
one
to
room
2nd grade.
up through 2nd grade. Okay, go ahead and continue telling us about your father and mother. Your dad came here.
Our dad was someone who wanted something better for his family, and he didn't like the way he was treated. He didn't like the way blacks were treated down there. Like on his job, he was not allowed to do certain things. He worked for a cleaners, You know, he did dry cleaning down there, and he would deliver. You know, he was a dry cleaner. He would press clothes, and they'd have him. They had a service where they would deliver clothes to people out in the countryside. Well, what was happening was they were tipping him money for deliveries, and his boss, I guess, found out about it and told him he could not have that money. You know, the only thing he could have was his salary, and I think there was some argument behind that. And down there, you do not argue or talk back to whites, okay? And I think that caused him some trouble. We were living in Monticello, Mississippi at the time, and we left there, and it was shortly, I think we came back to Wesson, and shortly after that, my father left. He heard about what Uncle Charlie had been saying about this area, and he left. He took that as the time to depart.
Right.
Okay, he did. My dad was a proud man. He did not accept the way blacks were treated down there. Well, blacks were treated like property, people with no rights at all. Were held to certain kinds of work, paid ridiculously low wages for working and toiling all day long, from can't see in the morning to can't see at night. And my dad just didn't want that. He didn't want that. He believed that he should be treated with dignity as a person. And I no doubt he had some run-ins with whites down there behind his attitude. He would be called what they would phrase as an uppity nigger. You know, somebody who had to be put in his place.
Okay, so he came to Casper. Tell us what happened from there then.
Well, he came to Casper. He got a job. My uncle helped him to get a job. He got a job with some dry cleaning outfit up here. I don't know if it was 1 hour modernizing at that time, but it was a dry cleaning business. And
Where was it located, do you remember?
Casper.
I mean, the vicinity was, streets, anything, do you remember that?
I believe it was on 2nd Street.
Yeah, it was up on 2nd
On
Street.
2nd Street.
Okay, go ahead.
Anyway, and he worked, and he wrote us, and he stayed in communication with us, and he saved his money, and he managed to acquire a property, and at that point, 2 years later, after this had transpired, he sent for us.
Where was the property?
It was on Burlington. It was 1414 East Burlington Avenue.
Continue.
It was a very small, it was kind of like almost like a storefront, like home. And compared to...
It was formerly a store.
Yeah, well, maybe that's why I thought it looked like a store, because it certainly seemed more, because there was a large, big room, and then there were little rooms in the back. So, but compared to, I guess, what had been in Mississippi, that's strange. See, and I think you have to look at the sacrifice that my father made, because see, in Mississippi, my brothers, my dad's brothers and all, they had property and they had built their own homes, and they were rather good, carpenters and home builders. In fact, so the house that he left probably was better looking and had, aesthetically was better than the house that we were living in there. And it might look, by some that we were actually, the socioeconomic scale kind of sliding down, but I think my dad was looking beyond that. And I think, as Wardell said, I always said that my dad, Frank, never was a man more aptly named, because he was very frank and very succinct and very direct. And I don't think that he would have probably have made it live that much longer had he stayed in Mississippi, because he wasn't one to bite his tongue nor mince his words, really. So
They still lynch black people down
Yeah, see, we're
or getting out of line. They still beat them and lynch them.
Yeah,
Or they come up dead somewhere, laying on the roadside somewhere. That was still going on.
yeah. You really have to time date that and look at the era that was, that things were going on. And then when we moved up here, that little house, I never forget, it was quite a bit of us. There were 7 at that time, or 6. No, 7, because Valerie had not been born. But
Right.
there were 7 of us, and we were in that little place. But education-wise, again, things were better. My dad was getting better jobs. And although I wouldn't call Wyoming a mecca by any sorts for black people, it really was, given the comparison of it being in rural Mississippi to here, it was, it was kind of an upclimb, and some people might think that we had jumped from the fire into the frying pan, so to speak, that, because there were some challenges, being in Wyoming. It truly was not a mecca for a black family out here. But I think given the choice, it was, as far as education, it was eminently better because there were so few of us up here, you couldn't segregate. I mean, you weren't going to build a whole another school just for a few black people. So the same education that was afforded white kids, which I've always thought that Wyoming, had a very good educational system that was very traditional and very rigid, and you learn, the 3 R's and that type of curriculum. And, so we had the same opportunities educational-wise, and, what is always said, that education is the number one predictor of your social, economic, whatever. It's the number one predictor. And I think my dad saw that given the chance for equal opportunity in education, that the other things would come about. And I think he was correct in that. And not to use as contrast, but I look at my cousins who stayed down there, and I'm not in any way trying to say that my cousins are, not our equal or not. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying, had we stayed and received that really substandard education as some of my cousins did, you can see the difference in their lives. You can see that, and it's almost like a research. And the control group are my cousins in Mississippi, and when we would go back down there, for example, my brother Albert went down there when he was like in the 8th or 9th grade.
It's about 9th grade.
Yeah, and he was teaching his, they would just let him teach the class or help him with his other classmates, because his education, or where he was at in his education, was so superior to the people that were his same age group that it wasn't funny. And when we would go down there, we'd find that out. Like if you were in 7th or 8th grade and you were doing fractions or something, they would have fractions, but they would stop at at a level. They wouldn't go to an advanced level. They wouldn't look at like algebraic expressions or whatever, the primer to going into algebra and geometry, because they weren't going to go into algebra and geometry. And so they just got kind of the bare, rudimentary, aspect of like math and different subjects like that. And so the education that we received up here was totally different.
It certainly was. It's far superior.
Yeah.
They were light years behind.
Now there was a flip side to that too. Now when we were getting this great education, there were also the times that I remember the first time I went to Willard as well. I went to kindergarten at Willard, and the first day, I got a dog seeked on me. I got hit by a rock. I had 2 kids that wanted to beat me up, and so it was so extremely harsh and so extremely a rude welcoming. I've always said that when I think black people start coming to Wyoming, it's just like if a spaceship from Mars had just hovered down and we just one by one came down from the spaceship. It would have been no different, because people just, I don't think people had seen black people.
They were treated as a curiosity, almost like space visitors from another planet, you know. People look at you and ask questions. I think one girl asked me once, do you really have a tail?
Yeah.
Yes, that sort of thing.
Well, I had kids ask me, this one little kid came up to me, I remember, and asked me if he could lick me because he thought I was made of chocolate. Just a lot of things like that. You know, and this is the truth. I would not lie about this. When I was in the second grade, I went to Roosevelt School over here. That's when it was an elementary school. Now it's an alternative high school. But this kid in the other second grade class came and got me for show and tell. I'm not lying. He brought me in and he was like, he was pretty cordial about it and respectful, but he thought I was I was more of an oddity than, say, maybe an agate or arrowhead that you would find. So he brought me in as for show and tell. Like, I know you guys have agates and arrowheads and you guys have this, but do you have this? And so, so there was a lot of things like this. And you're talking about some really tough people. I mean, this is a tough environment, so there were tough kids. We went to school with the oil field kids, that their parents that worked in the oil field, or the ranch hand,
the cowhead
kids. And these kids were tough. They were tough kids, and they were obliged to fight you at any time, anywhere. And I never forget this one kid. When I was walking home one time, he picked up this rock. And he just brained me with this rock. Wham! And I'm like, why on earth did you do that? I was like, what did you do that for? And then he told me, and I never forget it. It kind of showed the hierarchy of things here. He said, well, I guess he was a cowboy, or something. He said, just be glad you wasn't no good stinking sheep herder, boy. That's what he said, and he had a bigger rock for me. So I guess he was telling me that even though he didn't like me, that he hated sheep people even more. And so I think it was, I guess what I'm trying to say is we had a lot of bumps and bruises. We had to fight every day to school and then fight back from school. And it was very, very difficult.
You were at Willard K through 2?
I went to Willard just 1 year. They went to Willard quite a few years. I went to Willard, and then we moved over in 1961, the spring of 1961. We moved over on Beach Street, 1025 North Beach.
See, when you started the school, it was Willard.
Before that,
because when we first came here, you weren't even going to school yet. It was Roosevelt.
No, it wasn't Roosevelt.
It was a school almost downtown.
Yeah,
Washington.
They tore it down.
Yeah, they tore it down. That's where the older ones of us started. The ones who were in school at the time. That's where we started. And then by the time you started the school, it was Willard.
Yeah, we were going over at Willard, and then we moved over on Beach in '61, and then we started going to Roosevelt, and some of us went to Lincoln. North Casper is now both, but it was Lincoln Elementary.
What grades did you go to Washington, then what grades at Willard?
Okay, Washington, I started, so I had completed the second grade down south. I had missed a year of school because my dad moved to some place. Where he moved, it was so remote, we didn't even get a chance to go to school, those of us who were attending. So the last grade I completed was the second grade. I missed the whole year of school. And when I came here, it was like, it was just so different. School was. Everything was on such a different level. And so they said, well, we can't promote you to the third grade. We'll have to leave you in the second grade. And my brother, he was going through something similar to that, only the grade that he had completed, he took some tests. They put him back to a grade below that.
Was that Albert?
It was Vernon.
Vernon.
So what they did was give me a battery of tests. I guess I sort of objected to that. I don't want to go back to the second grade. So they gave me a battery of tests. The teacher did. She tested me, and I passed it. So they passed me to the third grade. Okay. And I think the only reason was because this teacher was sympathetic. This teacher tried to help me. My brother didn't experience the same thing. He wasn't given an opportunity to take any tests and to sort of, remedial some kind of remedial course of action that would allow him to go to the next grade. But my teacher did. So I went on to the 3rd grade. Okay? So I was all right in that way.
That was at Washington
In
School.
Washington. But it was such a totally different environment. It was like, it was shocking to go to school with white kids. I mean,
So total inversion.
I didn't know how to take it at first. Okay, now it was a cultural shock, a social shock,
Right.
and I stayed to myself. Didn't even speak to them because I didn't want anybody to call me a nigger, because that's what I was accustomed to. And down there they called you a nigger just like it. That was your daily greeting, nigger. You know, that was all right, nigger. That's what we were called. Okay? And so I'm thinking that's what they're going to be calling me? What are they going to do to me here? And I felt like somebody, I don't know, I guess I felt like some kind of test tube experiment. I don't know how to adequately describe that.
Yeah.
But it took me a while to get over that trauma, okay? The teacher had to tell me, it's okay for you to participate. I sat there and other kids thought I was dumb because I was still shell-shocked. And he's dumb, isn't he? Boy, that's a dumb kid. And the teacher told me, look, I want you to participate in class. Come out of your shell. Participate. It's all right. She reassured me. And I don't remember her name, but I thank her to this day. I was too young. And she slowly got me to come alive, to participate. And then when she found, the other kids found out I wasn't so dumb. In fact, I was pretty smart. And I remember there was a math. We were having math at the time, and there was a problem that she'd given us. Okay, when you have the answer, raise your hand. And I raised my hand. I said, "Oh, I know, it's ought." And the other kids looked at me. Yeah, that's no such thing. That's wrong. And the teacher understood. She said, "I know." She said, "You meant zero, but you say ought. They say ought down south." And she told the class, "Look, things are a little different. He might not express himself the same way, but that's okay. That's the right answer. It means the same thing." And from that point on, you know, things progressed a little better for me. And I still had experiences where I was called a nigger by some kid, and I believe that his family had come up from down south. And his name was Morton. See, I won't forget his name, because he called me a nigger. And he kept calling me that. And he would push me at school, and I was so afraid. It never occurred to me to hit him back. And I still was suffering from that. You know, that you didn't do things to whites. And they could do anything they wanted to do to you.
You didn't go around hitting white kids. I mean, you'd get killed. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of Emmett Till, and he was a boy in Mississippi. In fact, that didn't live too much further than where my mom was born, in Rockport, and he was killed. He was like, what was he, 11?
Yeah.
He was killed for supposedly whistling at a white woman. And so that type of thing that was instilled in you for safety, and when we came up here, you didn't do that to white kids. It finally took us a while that it was okay to, you know, if they hit you, you could hit them back. You could defend yourself. And I had similar experiences with, as Wardell told you about, with those first few days. It was just unbelievable that your world was completely inverted. And it was more so for them than me, because I was a little younger, so my history of that isn't as, you know, as focused as theirs are. But, you know, it was like everyone that you knew or lived by or whatever was all black. And then all of a sudden, everyone that is everywhere is all white. I mean, you need transitional time. You can't just go, one day you're in Mississippi, in rural Mississippi, all black Mississippi, and then 3 days later, you're up in all white Wyoming. It does something to your mind. It really does. It's just, you know, it's too herky-jerky to socially, societally, to really process that.
And I suffered
I had
from
never
it.
thought about it.
Yeah.
And I suffered from that. I really did.
See, there's two dynamics there. The first part, you were getting the same education. That's good. And I have to say, I always commend all of my teachers, white teachers, and I can remember every one of the teachers that I had Miss Mason was my teacher at Willard, my kindergarten teacher, and Mrs. Alger was my first grade teacher. Mrs. Mason was my second grade teacher. And Mrs. Wright, remember Mrs. Wright? She was my third grade teacher. And then Mrs. Stewart was my fourth grade teacher. Mr. Turpinning was my fifth grade teacher. And I remember them all.
Total recall here.
I remember
That's
them all.
wonderful.
Amazing.
And they really, and I think if it weren't for them, and you know, the times that I've seen them again, and all, can't forget Mr. Lawson, my sixth grade teacher, but as difficult as it was for us, they always seemed to help. And maybe they weren't as astute as maybe people are today culturally, maybe multiculturalism
Well, they
or
weren't.
diversity
They weren't.
is you know, that's now more of a modern term. But I think they still knew about it because they really helped me through a lot and really cared about your education and really,
Yeah, they did.
you know, put the ruler to you as quickly as they did anyone else. And that was the only part of my educational experience that I felt there was equation, because I always felt that my teachers had as much concern for my educational well-being as any of my classmates, and I always thought that was very important. Now, the socialization that's taken place, though, which were beyond their control, no, it was very much distorted. Like when you got on the playground, of course, all the little games, they wouldn't want to play with you, and there would be, you know, different things like that.
Right.
And like when they did the little plays and all, that was so funny. Like, remember those little plays that they would do with the music and stuff, and they would put on the, yeah. And I remember I was always the backdrop. I was always like a rock or a tree or something. I'd be like, I want to be the handsome prince, right? Handsome prince come right and go, well, we're not going to cast you this time. And I'd always have one of those tree parts. Yeah, it's like, we can't cast you for that. And, you know, I'd be the big oak tree.
I remember the oak
Mr.
tree.
Prince, won't you come and rest under my shaded branches? And I was always, or a rock. It's hard to play a rock. I mean, it's hard to emote when you have to play a rock. I always felt my acting skills, my emoting skills, my thespian skills were not being put to use as a
Quite
rock or a
challenged,
tree.
yeah.
I have to admit, being a rock is kind of limited.
Yeah, and so that socialization that was happening was really hard. I mean, your self-esteem, to be black in Wyoming, you had to have strong, healthy, strong self-esteem to get by with. Because like what Bill said, nigger was just, you were going to get called nigger. And so I remember it was kind of like with my cousins and friends and all, because we came to the immediate conclusion that you were going to be called nigger. So if you tried to fight for somebody every time you got called nigger, you would wear out your fist. I mean, it just wasn't the way. So we all kind of had like what I always call it, a nigger list, you know, like these are things that you'll fight for, but these other things wouldn't.
You had to let it go.
Yeah, and I remember the worst one with that is with what we had my cousin Everett, Aunt Augusta's son. We came up with this. It was called machine gun niggers, where they were saying rapid fire real fast. Nigger, 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 nigger.
Yeah.
That was the worst one. I couldn't stand that. That was the worst. That was the worst one. And so we all had our little things going on. If you call me that way, I'm gonna fight you. But if you just plain old nigger, I'll let you go. You know. But if you said it that way,
I shouldn't be laughing at this.
then I mean it was you know, when you look at it, it was part of the socialization of the environment that you're in. You were conditioned. You got so conditioned. And I think that's maybe why that word doesn't have as much sting, because sometimes it could be a compliment. I remember one time me and my brother and cousins were going to the show, and this white man came up to us, and he was being very cordial and nice and everything, and he just said, how you young men doing? And which we loved being called young men instead of boy, as you can imagine being from the South. And we said, fine, how you doing? And he said, boy, you're some well-dressed young men. And we're like, thank you. He said, about the best looking niggers I've seen in there. That was me and Ivory and Everett and Clarence. Yeah, he didn't think there was any wrong with calling. So we got it so often. We had it so often that it just became, it was more desensitized. You had to become desensitized to the word.
You develop a tough hide.
Yeah, you did. And the things about, because Wyoming was equally as segregated, it just didn't have the tenacity of enforcement as did the South. But there are places you didn't go, like the Red and White Cafe. You go up in there, they had signs. I mean, it just wasn't as stated. But I think the difference of, say, the South and Wyoming didn't have a history of black people, so there wasn't really much of a threat. When there's only a few people,
Right.
yeah, you don't have as much threat. But in the South, where there were growing numbers, and you have that history, and the South, I always say, was the epicenter of all the things of racial strife, because that's where slavery was. So therefore, the residual effect, the residue from that institution, are more harsh and extreme in the South. But up here, we still had a lot, very much, and these people up here were just as blatant and just as, they tell you in a second. Like this one guy that used to live over by us, I never forget, it was a great example of equal opportunity, or he, we had done some work for him and stacked some stuff in his, he had this big old barn over here, and myself and Mike, and I think it was my cousin Everett too, and we worked hard, and then he asked, while I was leaving, he asked me if I wanted to work again. There was this other white kid that wanted to work as well, and he told me just straight up, I'll never forget it, he said, well, I'm going to tell you something. You, and he pointed to the white kid, he said, I might let you sup with me, eat with me, or might let you court one of my daughters, but I'd rather have him work it for me because he does a better job. I mean, he was telling me this, like, he was telling me, you will never eat with me, you will never break bread at my table. No.
It was kind of subtle in a way,
yeah,
but it was...
Yeah, but he told me
that word lots, subtle.
Yeah, and this was Wyoming in a microcosmic way, that he was telling me, I will not break bread with you, you will not date one of my daughters, but as far as your work, you have a good work ethic and you work well, so I'm going to hire you. And I think that's kind of the way Wyoming was, is that...
Working relationship.
Yeah, and it was a work ethic. Yeah, and at the same time you weren't going to socialize with them, but at least you could work by them, and that would be okay. And for I would say almost all black people, that was eminently better than what was going on in the South. And there were two educational processes going. First of all, the educational system that we were learning, and I think we were doing a good job. We were our needs were being satisfied. But on the other side, I always think of the tremendous blow that was done to any black kid growing up in Casper, Wyoming, because there was nothing in your image. There was nothing successful. No. There were no role models. There were no teachers. There were no doctors. There were no lawyers. There were no engineers. Nobody that was successful was black. And if you have the formula for an inferiority complex, or feel that you're less than an equal person, this is the grounds that would breed that. And I think it affected all of us, and some of us in more extreme ways. But you never thought it was easy to start believing that you were inferior if you didn't want to, because you didn't have anything. Like, we had no magazines, no nothing. We didn't have subscriptions. The only time we would see black faces, prior to when you start seeing blacks on TV in the late 60s, was that the lady across the street from us, Mrs. Bannister, she had subscriptions to Ebony magazine and Jet magazine, and she would, after she was finished with them, she would give them to us. And I always joked around, said I thought Ebony and Jet came with the coffee rings on them, because Mrs. Bannister would set her on a coffee table and they would get coffee rings, and then that's when we always got. I never saw a new Jet until I think I was, had moved from here.
And Gordy Bannister's wife.
Mm-hmm.
And when you read it, I mean, your mind was so thirsty, so deprived, of hearing, seeing anything about black people doing anything in a significant way. I mean, I mean, we ate those things up. I
Right.
mean,
We would
read 'em
actually
and reread them.
Yeah, we'd actually fight. We'd have fights
Yeah.
on who was going to read them first, of
Really?
the Jet or the
Yeah.
Ebony, and we would just sit there, and sometimes we'd share and look at black people. You'd see like Sammy Davis Jr. or Diane Carroll,
Mhm.
or you would see some of the other performers like Nat King Cole, or they'd have an article on their house, and then we'd like they'd show their big houses and all, and it was so amazing to us to see black people having big mansions and homes and things like that, and I think that kind of it was a kind of a dream world for us to imagine that. So that was very difficult, our educational process. Even though I thought we got a quality education, there were some sacrifices made. And given the druthers, if I would have rather stayed in Mississippi, where there was disparate education, but more black people, and given this, where there were, an extreme dearth of black people, but at the same time, you were getting quality education. And I would hate that any kid would have to choose between the two. Hopefully you would have both. But I would have chosen, if I were in my father's shoes, I would have chosen Wyoming given the two.
Given the two between Wyoming and Mississippi, one was definitely a lesser of two evils.
Yeah,
besides
exactly.
what
And I do want to go back to your father and mother for a second. Obviously, your experiences in the public schools were similar, right, Wardell?
They were similar. They were
Mhm.
similar. There were some incidents that I experienced in school that I know were born out of racist attitudes.
Mhm.
Sure, there were, but they were not the rule. They were, I would probably say, more of an exception. I just want to summarize that there was a feeling, many times there's a feeling of invisibility. In being invisible, you didn't really matter. You were insignificant because there were so few of us, right? And I think we suffered from that. Our psychics suffered from that. Where you're being merely tolerated because there are so few of you. Oh, we can tolerate so much from you. Yes, you can go to our schools. You can. We might even socialize with you on a certain level and everything. You're harmless. What can you do to us? This sort of thing. I think I experienced that a lot of times. I did. And also, I think I also experienced instances where people sincerely accepted me, And it was a mixed bag. But overall, I think we were culturally deprived. You felt that way because school was of and for basically whites, and there were so few of us, we just sort of were thrown in there, okay? And as a result, we did derive the benefits of a superior education system, but not by plan, but by default, I guess.
Yeah. And what you said about being invisible, like Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, that part, that's the most exacting description of that. But I think, to look at contrast when I was my first day of kindergarten, when I thought that, I didn't know if I was going to return to school. If I did, I was, looking for armor, or pseudo armor or something, because, had a really pretty rough first day. My first day of interaction with white people, my first day was so extreme and so hard. And, I tell people today, and then you hear a lot of times that when people are trying to make their cross-cultural experiences, they're going along that continuum. And I hear a lot of white students, they'll tell me like, well, I tried to go to a Black Student Alliance meeting, or I tried to do this and that, and they didn't receive me very well. And I always ask myself, well, did they throw rocks at you? Did they call you whitey? Or did they, it's like, no. I said, well, see, let me tell you something. If you're going to, your first experience if it's somewhat negative, then back out of there. I said, if I did that, I would probably not speak to white people today, because my first 150 experiences with white people were probably negative. It probably was on the 151st experience that was maybe positive, and I know I'm kind of being extreme with that, but so I always use that as kind of an analogy of what you have to, when you're doing any type of cross-cultural, outreach, that you have to realize that it may not be just, peaches and cream all the time.
You guys have done an excellent job in portraying what I believe was reality here too. I remember one of Miss Hannah, 5th grade,
Miss Hannah.
had you come stand up in front of the whole class and show how to pick cotton out of its bowl. I remember that. It's just
remember
such a
that.
very vivid memory to me.
And
Yeah.
I had those experiences where you were just singled out and then
Mhm.
boom.
I
And
remember
it
that.
got even different in
Amazing.
junior high. We'll maybe get to that. But you asked about our mom and dad, what they were
Yeah,
like.
I want to know, after they got to Casper, well, what did your mom do for those 2 years that your dad was up here?
She just more or less took care. She was a homemaker.
I
Okay.
can tell you what, yeah, she was a homemaker, and I'll tell you what she did. She did what many, many other black peoples did down there. Worked in the fields,
Mhm.
picking cotton,
Mhm.
still picking cotton at that time. Picking cotton, picking beans, peanuts,
Field hand.
field hand,
Okay.
any kind of farm, any kind of work like that, that's what she'd be doing. Or she would be, because we were living with my grandmother at the time, there would be, whites would come over with their laundry, and it would be, they'd wash it and iron it, these big baskets. Then they'd come back maybe a couple of days later and pick it up. She was helping my grandmother do that, and we were working in the fields. I was working in the fields at the age of 6 and 7 years old. This is what she was doing.
Okay, so they got to Casper. He had the job at the dry cleaners. Did she, with this huge family, obviously, she was very busy. Did she have to get a job too, or?
No,
Okay.
she, during that time, in the 60s and stuff, it was mostly, it was the, one breadwinner, which was male, and
Right.
the homemaker
Right.
was the female, and that's pretty much what my mom did, which was a tremendous.
We have found through this history project that many of the people who came to Casper in the 50s, both male and female, were sent into, in some kind of domestic help. Most of them.
You're talking about here in Wyoming, when they came up here. Yeah, well, you know what? That's true. The other men, my father's age, grown men who were providers and everything, they worked like they cleaned buildings at night. I mean, there were no teachers, there were no doctors, there were no lawyers, there were no office professionals and things like that. No, they didn't sit in offices. They did. They worked with their hands. They did janitorial work was a big thing. A lot of them did that. My dad, he pressed clothes, but yeah, they were. It was manual labor, sure, in the lower occupations, Sure it was.
So you went from Burlington then to, I got a lot of notes here, Beach Street.
Beach Street.
And is that where the family home is now, or?
Oh, well, yeah, my sister lives now in the house that we pretty much grew up in. Burlington, we didn't live there that long, so I consider really our home.
The reason we didn't live long in Burlington because that house was a storefront. That's all it was. And, it's converted to a house. It was sitting on a sand lot, and we were harassed by scorpions.
Yeah,
Okay.
scorpion bites.
And they would be all in the house. I remember one time we were laying there. I was laying on the floor watching TV, right? And we were all in that little room, the whole family. And I was lying there, and my father all of a sudden jumped up, and he said, "Get up, get up, get up." And I didn't get up fast enough. He had to move over and knock me out of the way. There was this scorpion about that long that was making a beeline toward me. That was just one of many experiences with the scorpions. That was one of the things that compelled my father to do. One thing. The other was the fact that every time it rained, we'd get flooded. Just sitting there flat on the
sinking a little bit.
Yes.
And it was right next to the Burlington Railroad, right there. I mean,
I think they built several houses like that, or did that,
was-
because I know there's one next door to my mother's house that's just sitting a lot.
It
like
was
that, yeah.
really not a good place.
What was the cross street there, Burlington and what? Do you remember?
Let's see, what is that? Burlington? Well, it was just down from, is that McKinley?
McKinley.
Where the underpass is?
Yeah, McKinley.
So down, and before there was like Jackson West, and we lived at the edge there. There was like was it Allied or Mayflower
Okay.
van lines? It
They were
just
both
right
of them.
before you
It was
got to
Mayflower
yeah.
and Allied. They were like across the street
Mhm.
from one another.
Great. You guys, I'm going to need to get these kids going in about 10 minutes here, so I'd like to, obviously, you have given us so much valuable and rich information, and I want to thank you for that. You obviously came from some of the most loving parents I've ever heard about. I want to know what happened to you. I mean, where did you wind up graduating from high school? What'd you do? Where'd you go to college? Anything?
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Let's see. After I went to Dean Morgan Junior High after school, and as Wario said, in that time they did those aptitude tests before you went to junior high. If you did well, then they put you in those sections. Remember, and I was in a pretty advanced section, and so again, I was given a privy to really good education. It was actually the precursor to college prep. Actually I was getting. They didn't call it as such. And so I went to Dean Morgan, then I went to NC, and it was it was a real shaping of my life because I thought at that time that people were kind of accepting us, or at least I had white friends. We did pretty well. We did pretty well after my 7th grade. I still kind of had a hard time with 7th grade because I was another transition as well. Because those kids that I was in class with, they were all from the south side of town. They were very rich, and that was another thing. You first we had race, and then there's class. You had to deal with that. But after the 7th grade, my 8th grade, 9th grade, I loved school.
Did you get involved in sports?
Yeah.
We're finding that that's where the success key was to getting along.
But for me, it was more. Also I was in student government too, and I was, I found it as much in academics and my co-curricular activities as much as sports as well. But, sports was a part of it. I played football, and I played basketball, and track and all of that. And then, like I said, I went to NC, and I graduated in '73. And then I went my freshman year, University of Wyoming in Laramie. I did not like it there to the point that I thought it was just a reiteration of high school because there were so many people that I knew from NC and from Kelly Walsh that were there. It just didn't do anything for me. Plus, I'm just going to be honest, the proliferation of drinking and partying and all, because Laramie has that. Yeah. And it just wasn't working for me. I just didn't think that my grade point average had suffered. I think I had like a 2.8 or a 2.9, and
which is not failing by any means.
But that was to me not acceptable because I had graduated from NC as a National Merit Scholar, and so I was kind of embarrassed that I had such a low GPA. So I transferred to the University of Northern Colorado, really because I thought I wanted to get into teaching or education. And, prior to its debacle, UNC in secondary education, it was considered the best in the country. So I went there and I graduated. Then I changed actually in education. I went more into journalism, communication. I got a bachelor's of art in communication, and then I got a minor in journalism, and then I also finished a postbac in what's called interpersonal communication. And then later on I went back and got my teacher's certification from there. And currently I'm working on a master's. I'm going to call it master's because it's an accelerated PhD program, but I can't look at it as getting a PhD is so far down the road. I just have to look at finishing the master's. I'll be finished with my master's in higher ed administration probably next summer. And then I'm going to enter the PhD program maybe, and if I'll finish that if I don't die.
That's one thing I've always wanted to do is go back and get a PhD. Are you a teacher? Have you been a teacher? Or?
I taught. My first teaching was up here. I taught at Dean Morgan. Let's see, what was that? 80, 81 taught there, and I got just a single year contract there, and I don't know. I've always jumped back from in education and journalism. For a while, I was a writer for a magazine in Denver, and then I was in public relations, and then I go back to education. So I've kind of done that, and let's see, now I work at the university. I work in the Student Affairs Division at Colorado State University, and the assistant director of Black Student Services. And I teach a transition class. It's for freshmen and transfer students. It's kind of to give them kind of a basic preparatory skills to be successful in college, like how to write a term paper or a research paper, which most cannot do, how to public speaking, just those basic
Really
things that,
important things,
yeah,
yes.
regardless of your chosen discipline, you're
need
going
that.
to need, right. And so that I teach one class a semester on that.
Wardell, what about you?
Me? Oh well, I graduated. I graduated from Natrona County High School, 1966, I believe. If I'm not mistaken. Well, no, 1967.
67.
Yeah, and then I went on to Casper College. It was convenient, and but before I graduated from Natrona County High School, after I graduated, they had this college placement program right there in the high school, and I expressed an interest in going to Casper College, and this advisor advised me, well, you're not college material, and you should be looking for a job, maybe, and she was talking about the kind of jobs that might be available for me, and you can imagine what they were, right? So she made me angry, and I said, no, I want to go to college, right? And she didn't express any faith that I could pass the placement exam. So I took it anyway. I said, look, it's my choice. I said, I get a chance to take it. Let me fail it first instead of telling me that I'm not going to make it. So I took it and scored very high, very high. Then I came back and showed her the results defiantly. Anyway, I went to Casper College, and I graduated from there in 1970. There was a graduating class of about over 600. I was a lone black person. And I think shortly after that I had my feel of this place. I think I really grew disenchanted with Casper. So I left. I spent a few years wandering here and there. I lived in St. Paul, Minneapolis. I even went back to Mississippi. And, I didn't stay there very long. I left Mississippi, and I was on my way back to St. Paul, or either here, I ran into a cousin, and he convinced me to come out to Philadelphia. And I went out there, and that was in 1971. At that time, I only had 2 years of college. 2 years at Casper College. It wasn't a 4-year institution. I don't think it still is. But anyway, make it short to say, I spent years working for various places. I was bent on getting a degree, at least a bachelor's degree, and I'd go to school, take a few classes, and I wouldn't continue, and it wasn't until I was age 35 that I finally got my bachelor's degree. Okay, and by that time I was working with the government, Department of Defense, and they had this educational program whereby they would reimburse you for courses. They encouraged education, especially in business area. So I used them to get my bachelor's degree, and I got that in 1985, and then thereafter I took a few graduate courses, and that's about it. And right now I'm still working for the Department of Defense, and I'll probably be working there until I retire. At this moment I'm undecided as to whether or not I want to seek any additional education. I kicked around the idea of getting a master's. I'm still, as of yet, undecided.
Where'd you go? Temple?
Yeah, I went to Temple University. That's where I got my undergrad degree. And
You guys, like I
Yeah.
said, I need to be getting these kids
Okay.
home. I've had them out quite a while. But what I want to tell you is I need to still follow through on brothers and sisters and kids in the family and all that kind of thing.